5 separate scientific teams have aimed instruments at the ground beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza. Every single one detected something anomalous. Not one has ever been allowed to find out what it is. The most precise measurement came in April 1991. Geologist Robert Schoch and seismologist Thomas de Beckie positioned 19 seismic refraction instruments around the base of the monument and recorded a void beneath the left front paw, roughly 12 metres by 9 metres, at a depth of 5 metres. A space the size of a modest apartment, sitting directly beneath the most famous statue on Earth. The survey was published in Geoarchaeology and remains, over 3 decades later, the only peer-reviewed geophysical study of the Sphinx's subsurface ever to appear in a scientific journal. No borehole has been drilled into the void. No camera has been lowered. No human being has laid eyes on whatever that space contains, or does not contain. Every formal request to investigate has been denied by the Egyptian government. 34 years of silence applied to a peer-reviewed detection beneath the single most scrutinized archaeological monument on the planet. The reason is not simple, and it is not what most people assume. It is not merely bureaucratic caution. It is not merely conservation concern, though the Sphinx is genuinely fragile. The real story involves an American psychic who died in 1945, a young archaeologist who went to Egypt searching for Atlantis and became one of Egyptology's most important scholars, a live Fox television broadcast watched by 10 million people that was largely staged, and the single most powerful figure in the history of Egyptian archaeology, a man who controlled access to the Sphinx for nearly 3 decades. Beneath all of this, the bedrock holds whatever it holds. The instruments have spoken. Their data is not in dispute. What remains in dispute is what it means, and whether anyone will ever be permitted to find out. So how did a 4,500-year-old monument become the centre of such an extraordinary collision of science, prophecy, and politics? The answer begins with the stone itself. The monument and its openings. The Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau on the western outskirts of Cairo, carved from the living bedrock of the Makatam Formation, a Middle Eocene limestone deposited roughly 50 million years ago when a shallow sea covered this part of North Africa. It faces due east. It measures approximately 73 metres from tail to outstretched paws and 20 metres from base to crown. The archaeological consensus, supported by stratigraphic evidence, ceramic typology, and contextual analysis of the surrounding quarry and temple complex, dates its carving to the reign of Khafre, approximately 2500 BC. The Sphinx is not a sealed monolith. At least 7 known openings penetrate its body and immediate surroundings, documented across centuries of exploration. The head shaft, designated Shaft A, sits atop the crown, roughly 5 feet square and 6 feet deep, first described by the German traveller Johann Helffrich in 1565. It was likely carved during the New Kingdom to anchor a headdress ornament. In 1926, the French engineer Émile Bauhies, who spent 11 years excavating and restoring the Sphinx, paved the shaft with cement and fitted it with a metal trapdoor that is still visible today. On the Sphinx's back, a shaft drilled in 1837 by the British officer Howard Vyse extends 27 feet into the bedrock. When Vyse's drill rod became stuck, he attempted to free it with gunpowder. The attempt failed. He abandoned it. In 1978, a young Zahi Hawass cleared the shaft and recovered a fragment of the Sphinx's Nimes headdress from its interior. A major natural fissure cuts through the waist, designated Shaft C, up to 2 metres wide with artificially squared sides, first excavated by Auguste Mariette in 1853 and sealed by Berets in 1926. A very narrow crack continues deeper below the sealed floor, its full extent unknown. Between the paws, an eastern shaft lies beneath an iron grate from the 1920s restoration. On the north side, at the enclosure ledge, sits what Mark Lehner has called the keyhole shaft. 1.4 2 by 1.06 metres and approximately 2 metres deep, containing a large piece of polished basalt that Lehner interpreted as evidence of an unfinished tomb. But the most intriguing opening is Shaft D, the rump passage, rediscovered in 1980 after 3 elderly men, former basket carriers who had worked for Berets in the 1920s, recalled its existence and pointed to its location. The passage descends crudely into the bedrock beneath the hindquarters, reaching the water table at about 4.5 metres. Cup-shaped footholds line the walls. Modern debris, glass, cement, tin foil, was found near the bottom. Its original purpose remains unknown. Additional openings on the north and south flanks appear in photographs from the Braze era, but were covered by restoration masonry. Between 1978 and 1998, Hawass and Lerner reportedly rediscovered access to several large, apparently natural caves beneath the Sphinx, with evidence of earlier ancient excavation. No artifacts were recovered. The caves are consistent with the underlying karst geology, but the evidence of ancient modification suggests the Egyptians knew about these natural features and may have explored or utilised them. The Sphinx bears the marks of at least 4 major ancient restoration campaigns, layered in its masonry veneer. The oldest repairs, using large blocks in a style consistent with Old Kingdom masonry, may date to the late 4th or early 5th dynasty, within centuries of the monument's original carving. A second phase, using smaller blocks, corresponds to the New Kingdom restorations associated with Thutmose IV and possibly Ramesses II. A third phase dates to the 26th dynasty, the Sate period, when the Sphinx received significant attention as part of a broader archasing movement that looked back to Old Kingdom models. A fourth phase, using Roman-era brickwork and plaster, reflects the monument's continued importance during the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. Each phase implies that restorers had access to the monument's shafts and fissures, and made decisions about which openings to seal and which to leave accessible. The modern configuration of passages reflects these accumulated decisions as much as any original design. These openings are documented. They are not secrets. Every few years, an image of one of Braze's iron trapdoors circulates on the internet, accompanied by breathless claims that Egyptologists are hiding access to hidden chambers. The claims are false as regards these specific openings. What is genuinely unknown is whether additional features exist beyond their reach, deeper in the bedrock, in positions that existing shafts do not penetrate. That question has been asked repeatedly by some of the most sophisticated instruments available to science. Here is what each campaign found and what each was and was not permitted to do with its results. 5 campaigns, 4 decades, 1974 to 1978, SRY. International, Lambert Dolphin arrived at Giza in 1974 as a senior research physicist at SRI International, based in Menlo Park, California. His expertise was in electromagnetic propagation and remote sensing, technologies originally developed for military applications during the Cold War. His team employed resistivity measurements, magnetometry, and ground-penetrating radar, then a relatively new technology for archaeological use. The 1977 report, published as an SRI technical document, noted anomalies behind the rear pores suggesting a northwest to southeast tunnel, plus deep anomalies in front of the pores. The technology of the mid-1970s was limited. The radar systems had restricted depth penetration and resolution. Resistivity arrays produced 2-dimensional profiles rather than 3-dimensional volume images. Despite these constraints, the surveys detected clear anomalies, zones where subsurface properties differed markedly from surrounding rock. In 1978, the team drilled 5 4-inch boreholes at the strongest anomaly locations and inspected each with a downhole television camera. Every anomaly proved to be natural cracks and fissures. Dolphin declared the question a dead issue, meaning the specific anomalies he investigated were natural. But 5 boreholes across several hundred square meters is sparse sampling, and the anomalies Dolphin targeted were not the same ones that later surveys would identify as most significant. The funding history matters. Hugh Lynn Casey, son of the psychic Edgar Casey and head of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, provided approximately $100,000 for the survey through the Edgar Casey Foundation, an enormous sum for archaeological geophysics at the time. Dolphin maintained that his methodology was independent of his funding source, a plausible claim given his long career at a respected institution. But the funding connection meant that every result would be filtered through the lens of Casey's prophecy. When drilling found nothing, supporters argued the wrong anomalies had been tested. The entanglement of prophetic expectation with scientific investigation created a situation in which no result could satisfy all parties. 1987, Waseda University. 9 years later, a team from Waseda University in Tokyo, led by Professor Sakuji Yoshimura, conducted electromagnetic sounding surveys, a significant improvement in methodology. The Japanese researchers had developed techniques offering better resolution than dolphins' resistivity methods. Their surveys were systematic, with dense sampling grids covering the entire Sphinx enclosure. Yoshimura's team was not searching for any prophesied chamber. They were conducting a broader survey of Giza's monuments and had previously applied the same techniques to the pyramids. Their data detected three features: a hollow 2.5 to 3 meters underground on the south side, a similar groove on the north side suggesting a possible connecting tunnel, and a geometric cavity between the 4 feet, roughly 1.5 by 3 meters at a depth of 1 to 2 meters, extending east to west toward the chest. Hawass, then chief inspector at Giza, summarized the findings by noting that the sanctuary of the Sphinx contains more cavities below it than were previously known, an acknowledgement in an official capacity years before his later public dismissals of subsurface anomalies. The geometric cavity between the 4 feet sits directly beneath the location described in Casey's readings as the entrance to the Hall of Records. This correspondence may be coincidental. The area between the 4 feet is where the bedrock is closest to the surface and where construction activity associated with the Sphinx temple has disturbed the subsurface. But the correspondence has made this anomaly a lightning rod for alternative researchers and a source of discomfort for mainstream Egyptologists who prefer data uncontaminated by prophetic associations. The Waseda survey was published in a university monograph series rather than a peer-reviewed journal. Its findings were never independently replicated or directly investigated through drilling. 1991. Schoch and Debecki. Thomas Debecki's methodology was rigorous. He collected 19 separate refraction profiles spaced at intervals around the entire enclosure. Seismic refraction measures the speed at which shock waves travel through rock. Intact, dense limestone transmits waves quickly. Fractured, weathered, or void-containing rock transmits them more slowly. The survey revealed two critical findings. First, subsurface weathering beneath the enclosure floor was non-uniform, 6 to 8 feet deep along the sides and front, but only about 4 feet deep at the rear. Schoch interpreted this as evidence that the front and sides had been exposed to precipitation-driven weathering for a significantly longer period than the rear, suggesting the Sphinx's main body predated the conventional 4th Dynasty attribution by thousands of years. This interpretation, the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, ignited a firestorm that has never fully subsided. Second, and more relevant to the subsurface question, the large low-velocity anomaly beneath the left front paw, 12 by 9 meters at approximately 5 meters depth, plus additional cavities along the south flank and between the paws. The void was not a single data point but a consistent feature across multiple adjacent profiles. Its boundaries were relatively sharp, suggesting a discrete feature rather than a gradual transition in rock properties. Schoch's interpretation that the void was ostensibly man-made was based on that regularity and sharpness, features that could imply excavated spaces rather than the irregular boundaries more typical of natural dissolution cavities. This interpretation remains inferential. Sharp-boundaried natural voids are less common but not impossible in karst environments. Unlike the SRI team's targets, these specific voids were never drilled. 1996 to 1999, the Shaw Foundation. The final major campaign was funded by Dr. Joseph Shaw, a lifetime member of the ARE and Vice President of Forest Laboratories. The Shaw Foundation was established in 1994 with the purpose, known to insiders, of finding the Hall of Records. Its permit described the objective in bland bureaucratic language: exploration of underground geological faults and cavities possibly injurious to tourists. Using seismic equipment and ground-penetrating radar over multiple field seasons, the team claimed in April 1996 to have found rooms and tunnels in front of and behind the Sphinx. In 1997, GPR reportedly detected an open area 30 feet below the surface, estimated at 26 by 40 feet, directly beneath the monument. When the SCA permitted a test drill near the Great Pyramid in 1998, it revealed only a natural cavity. Permission for further drilling was denied. The work was conducted under contractual secrecy, standard for SCA permits, but in the Sphinx's conspiratorial atmosphere, secrecy intensified suspicion rather than containing it. The full dataset has never been published. In conventional science, unpublished claims carry no evidentiary weight. They cannot be evaluated, replicated, or challenged. The Shaw Foundation's findings exist in a liminal state between data and rumour. cited by alternative researchers as evidence of hidden chambers and dismissed by mainstream archaeologists as unsubstantiated claims from a team with an obvious ideological agenda. Both positions are defensible, neither is conclusive. 2001 and beyond. A 2005 paper described a 2001 GPR survey near the left front paw that detected planar surfaces interpretable as either a tunnel or natural fractures. The ambiguity encapsulates the entire problem. Every instrument aimed at the Sphinx's subsurface has detected something, and no instrument has been able to distinguish with certainty between geological features and possible man-made structures. In 2024, a Japanese-Egyptian team from Tohoku University found an L-shaped underground anomaly near Giza's Western Cemetery using GPR and electrical resistivity tomography, published in Archaeological Prospection. Lead researcher Motoyuki Sato noted its geometry cannot be created by natural geological structures. The finding is near the pyramids rather than the Sphinx, but it demonstrates that non-invasive scanning continues to yield real results at Giza when conducted with proper methodology and institutional approval. In contrast, Italian researcher Filippo Biondi's 2025 claims of a spiral staircase descending to chambers at 2,000 and 4,000 feet beneath the Sphinx presented at a fringe conference were dismissed by radar specialist Lawrence Conyers as physically impossible. SAR technology penetrates only 1 to 2 meters in dry sand. The contrast between legitimate research and sensational claims illustrates the dynamic that has made Egyptian authorities ever more cautious about authorizing work that might feed the spectacle. The critical gap in the scientific record is straightforward. The anomalies detected by Debeki, Yoshimura and the Shaw Foundation have never been directly investigated. The only boreholes drilled at the Sphinx targeted different anomalies at different locations. This absence of targeted follow-up is what keeps both the scientific debate and the conspiracy theories alive. The published academic literature on the Sphinx's subsurface is remarkably thin for what is arguably the most iconic archaeological monument on Earth. Debeki and Schock's 1992 paper stands alone as the sole peer-reviewed geophysical study. Gari's geological rebuttal appeared in the same journal in 1995. Beyond these, the significant technical literature consists of Gari's foundational 1984 geological mapping, the Waseda University monographs, Dolphin's SRI project reports, the 2005 SEG paper, and Lehner's dissertation. The reasons for this scarcity are institutional and political. Conducting geophysical research at the Sphinx requires a permit, and permits have been exceedingly difficult to obtain, particularly for research that might produce results amenable to alternative interpretations. But before asking whether those anomalies are man-made, it is worth understanding why natural explanations are not only possible but geologically expected. The limestone beneath the Sphinx has been dissolving for 50 million years. 50 million years of limestone. The bedrock of the Giza Plateau is riddled with natural features. Paleokarst channels carved by ancient groundwater, dissolution cavities formed along orthogonal joint sets trending northeast and northwest, and soft marly beds prone to differential erosion are all predictable consequences of 50 million years of limestone chemistry. A landmark 1987 study by El Arif and Refai documented extensive subsurface solution features across the plateau, later identified as part of a hypogene sulfuric acid karst system driven by hydrogen sulfide and carbonic acid seeping upward from deeper hydrocarbon deposits. The Sphinx is carved from 3 distinct geological members of the Makatam Formation. Member 1, the Rosetow member, forms the base, a hard reefal limestone consisting of densely packed fossil organisms from the ancient reef environment. The pores and lowest body portions are carved from this relatively resistant stone. Member 2, the Setepet member, comprises the main body. It consists of 6 rhythmically deposited beds, alternating between harder limestone layers and softer beds rich in clay, marl, quartz sand, silt, and clay minerals. These softer layers weather dramatically faster than the harder ones, creating the Sphinx's distinctive undulating profile. Geologist K. Lalgori mapped these 6 beds in detail and demonstrated that the differential weathering follows the bedding planes with precision. Member 3, the Akhet member, caps the formation. Its upper portion is a relatively pure, hard limestone from which the head was carved. This explains the striking contrast between the well-preserved head and the severely eroded body. The difference is geological, not chronological. The head resists weathering because its material is more resistant, not because it is younger or carved by different builders. Two sets of vertical joints cut through the bedrock in a roughly orthogonal pattern, creating planes of weakness where groundwater preferentially dissolves the limestone. This dissolution process has been ongoing for millions of years. More recent geological work has identified a hypogene component. At least some dissolution was driven not by surface water percolating downward, but by gases and fluids rising from deeper formations. Hydrogen sulfide and carbonic acid from hydrocarbon seeps may have dissolved the rock from beneath, creating cavities whose geometry reflects the internal structure of the rock rather than surface drainage patterns. If this mechanism was active beneath the Sphinx's footprint, it could produce voids of considerable size with relatively regular geometry, potentially mimicking the appearance of man-made chambers on geophysical instruments. This is the fundamental ambiguity. A natural hypogene karst void and a man-made chamber can produce similar signatures on ground-penetrating radar and seismic refraction surveys. The Waseda University's 1.5 by 3 meter cavity seems too regular for natural dissolution, but hypogene karst can produce regular voids along bedding planes. The 12 by 9 meter anomaly seems too large for a simple joint-controlled cavity, but paleokarst channels in the Makatam Formation have been documented at comparable scales. The geological rebuttal of Schoch's water erosion hypothesis deserves mention here. Gowrie challenged Schoch in a 1995 geoarchaeology paper, arguing that the deep channels in the enclosure walls were pre-Pliocene karst features, natural formations millions of years old exposed by quarrying, not evidence of rainfall weathering. James Harrell argued that Schoch's seismic low-velocity zone might correspond to a natural change in rock faces rather than a weathering front. Judith Bunbury's Cambridge research demonstrated heavy rainfalls continuing through the end of the Old Kingdom, further complicating Schoch's claim. The geological consensus holds that the Sphinx's erosion patterns are consistent with natural processes, but this rebuttal addresses Schoch's dating argument, not his detection data. The void itself remains unexplained because it remains uninvestigated. The water table introduces a final complication. It has risen significantly since the mid-20th century due to the Aswan High Dam, urban development, and leaking infrastructure. Capillary rise carries dissolved salts upward into the Sphinx's body. As moisture evaporates, the salts crystallize, fracturing the stone grain by grain, the primary cause of accelerating surface deterioration. Rising water has also flooded subsurface features that may once have been accessible. The Osiris shaft's lowest level was perpetually flooded until the late 1990s. Water-filled cavities have different geophysical signatures than air-filled ones. Seismic waves travel faster through water, potentially masking the contrast between void and solid rock, while GPR is strongly attenuated by water-saturated media. Ancient shafts and tunnels, if they exist, would serve as conduits for groundwater flow, accumulating sediment and debris over millennia. Such features would present ambiguous geophysical signatures, neither clean voids nor solid rock, interpretable as either natural or anthropogenic depending on the assumptions brought to the analysis. Remote sensing alone cannot resolve what lies beneath the Sphinx. Only direct observation can, and direct observation requires authorization that has not been granted. What transformed a legitimate scientific question into something the Egyptian authorities treat as politically radioactive? The answer leads back nearly a century, to the prophecies of a man who never set foot on the Giza Plateau. Prophecy, television, and the gates of access, the sleeping prophet and his legacy. Edgar Cayce died in 1945. In the preceding decades, the so-called sleeping prophet had delivered trance readings that described a chamber beneath the Sphinx containing the complete history of Atlantis, written in both Atlantean and ancient Egyptian scripts. In Reading 5748-6, delivered July 1st, 1932, he described a passage from the right forepaw to this entrance of the record chamber. Reading 378-16 specified the location. As the sun rises from the waters, the line of the shadow falls between the paws of the Sphinx. A third reading identified 3 Atlantean record repositories, in the Bahamas, the Yucatan, and at Giza. The Association for Research and Enlightenment, founded by Cayce in 1931 in Virginia Beach, has funded or influenced virtually every major Sphinx exploration since the 1950s. The connections are documented and in most cases openly acknowledged. Hewlin Cayce, Edgar's son, organised the 1977-78 Sphinx exploration project. He funded SRI International Survey and Recovery Systems International's drilling operations. He recruited a young man named Mark Lehner, who had appeared at an ARE meditation class around 1971, and arranged a Casey Foundation scholarship for Lehner to study at the American University in Cairo. Lehner went to Egypt, by his own later acknowledgement, to search for the Hall of Records. His first book, The Egyptian Heritage, was published by ARE Press in 1974. By 1977, Lehner told Hawass he no longer believed. The transformation was gradual. As Lehner later explained, there were thousands of tombs of real people, statues of real people with real names, and none of them figured in the Casey stories. The weight of physical evidence slowly dissolved the Atlantean fantasy. He went on to become one of the most important Egyptologists of his generation, producing the first detailed scale plans of the Sphinx during the Sphinx project between 1979 and 1983, with 364 maps, 3,857 slides, and 1,740 photographs. His 1991 Yale PhD dissertation remains the most comprehensive archaeological documentation of the monument ever produced. The irony is persistent. The man who became Egyptology's most meticulous documenter of the Sphinx began his career funded by an organization dedicated to proving the existence of Atlantis, and the organization never stopped trying. Dr. Joseph Shaw, a lifetime ARE member since 1951, established the Shaw Foundation in 1994 and led the geophysical campaigns of 1996 to 1999. Hugh Lynn Casey claimed on tape, in recordings from 1979 to 80, to have arranged Hawass's University of Pennsylvania scholarship through an ARE member on the Fulbright board. Hawass has vehemently denied this. The truth has never been independently established, but the allegation has fueled decades of conspiracy theories about hidden relationships between the ARE, the Egyptian authorities, and researchers granted access to the Sphinx. The influence of Casey's prophecy on Sphinx research is documented institutional history. The SRI survey was funded by Casey's organization. The Shaw Foundation surveys were led by a lifetime Casey devotee. The defining archaeologist of the Sphinx was originally recruited and funded by Casey's foundation. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is the factual record of how money, access, and institutional connections shaped the investigation of one of the world's most important archaeological sites. These threads, the science, the geology, the prophecy, the politics, the spectacle, do not exist in isolation. They form a single tangled knot, and pulling on any one strand tightens the others. The detected anomalies cannot be evaluated without understanding the geology. The geology cannot explain the institutional response. The institutional response cannot be understood without the Casey legacy, and the Casey legacy cannot be disentangled from the funding and access decisions that determined which instruments were aimed at which locations and whether anyone was permitted to follow up on the results. The question of what lies beneath the Sphinx is, at every level, a question about the relationship between evidence and the human systems that produce, interpret, and suppress it. The television spectacle. The line between science and spectacle blurred most vividly on March 2nd, 1999, when Fox aired Opening the Lost Tombs, Live from Egypt, hosted by Maury Povich. The programme culminated in a live segment from the Osiris shaft, which Povich linked directly to Casey's prophecies. Hawass appeared prominently, guiding cameras through underground spaces with practiced flair. The reality was more complicated. The shaft had been excavated over months. The chamber at the bottom had been documented and photographed. The granite sarcophagus had already been opened. The hieroglyphic inscription PR had already been recorded. What the audience experienced as real-time discovery was carefully staged presentation of prior findings. Hawass later admitted to Inside Edition that the discoveries were staged. The highlighted burial chamber had been found a month earlier, and a newly opened Queen's tomb had actually been discovered in the 1800s. Separately, a promotional video from 1996 filmed by filmmaker Boris Said, who had worked with John Anthony West on the NBC documentary, captured Hawass scrambling into a tunnel beneath the Sphinx. In the footage, Hawass appears to say that the opening will be done soon, and that it will be live on television to prove the Casey predictions. This clip has been cited by conspiracy theorists ever since as evidence that Hawass was secretly allied with the ARE and knew what lay beneath the Sphinx. Hawass has characterized the footage as casual on-site conversation taken out of context. Based on what is visible, The remarks could be interpreted in multiple ways: genuine enthusiasm about an anticipated discovery, a casual nod to his audience's interests, or something else entirely. The footage alone cannot establish intent, but it circulated widely on VHS tapes and later on the internet, where it became a foundational document of the conspiracy narrative. For millions of viewers, the combination of the staged Fox broadcast and the Said footage constituted proof that Hawass was orchestrating a controlled revelation. The damage to institutional credibility was substantial and lasting. Hawass spent years attempting to distance himself from the Casey connection, while simultaneously maintaining relationships with individuals and organizations linked to the ARE. His vehement denials of the claim that Hugh Lynn Casey had arranged his Fulbright scholarship, a claim made by Hugh Lynn himself on tape, placed his personal credibility in direct conflict with documented recordings. Whether the claim is true or false, the existence of the recordings and the intensity of the denial created a permanent vulnerability that conspiracy theorists have exploited relentlessly: institutional backlash and restricted access. The Egyptian government's restrictions reflect an intersection of legitimate conservation concerns, political sovereignty, institutional control, and the complicated legacy of colonialism in Egyptology. The conservation argument is the most defensible. The Sphinx has deteriorated more in the last half-century than in all previous centuries combined, according to former Antiquities Organization chairman Dr. Syed Tawfiq, speaking in 1990. In February 1988, a large chunk of limestone fell from the right shoulder, variously reported as weighing between 300 and 700 pounds. The incident provoked international outcry, 10 months of debate, and the resignation of the Antiquities chairman. In 1982, veneer stones had fallen from the north hind paw. In 1955, a chemical injection into the chest intended to consolidate the stone flaked off and took original bedrock with it. The cement mortar used by Braze in the 1920s had reacted with the limestone, producing salts that accelerated surface decay. Each well-intentioned intervention created new problems requiring decades to address. The Getty Conservation Institute installed a solar-powered monitoring station on the Sphinx's back in May 1990. The data revealed conditions more destructive than previously believed: strong sand-bearing northwest winds, unexpected atmospheric moisture, daily salt cycling in the limestone from humidity fluctuations, and vibrations from nearby traffic. Stone loss was estimated at roughly 30 centimetres per century. The comprehensive 1989 to 1998 restoration, directed by Hawass in collaboration with Egyptian and international specialists, represented a fundamental change in approach, hand-cutting 12,478 replacement blocks from a quarry at Helwan, whose limestone matched the Sphinx's member 2 stone set with natural lime mortar rather than cement. During this decade-long restoration, research access was necessarily restricted, but the restoration ended in 1998. Over a quarter of a century has passed and no new geophysical survey has been authorized. The conservation rationale does not explain the continued prohibition on non-invasive scanning that involves no physical contact with the monument. The aftermath of the Fox broadcast hardened institutional policy further, having witnessed how a cooperatively produced television special could become ammunition for alternative narratives. Egyptian authorities became far more cautious about granting access to any researcher whose work might attract conspiratorial interpretation. Subsurface investigation at the Sphinx, regardless of the scientific credentials of the proposing team, became tainted by association with the Hall of Records. After the 1993 NBC documentary, The Mystery of the Sphinx reached 33 million viewers and popularized Schocher's water erosion hypothesis, Hawass physically expelled John Anthony West and his team, calling the documentary American Hallucinations. When Schoch submitted a permit application with a supporting letter from his Boston University dean, there was no reply. West's 1995 application was blocked. Yet simultaneously, the Shaw Foundation, led by a lifetime ARE member, received a permit in 1996. The pattern suggests Egyptian authorities tolerated foreign involvement when it was conducted under Egyptian supervision and aligned with institutional interests, but reacted fiercely to independent claims that bypassed official channels. This pattern repeated across the Plateau. Rudolf Gantenbrink was banned from Egypt after leaking his Great Pyramid robot discovery to the British press in 1993. Joanne Fletcher's team was banned in 2003 for announcing mummy identification findings without clearance. Sovereignty drives much of the policy, and not without historical justification. For 2 centuries, Western archaeologists treated Egypt's heritage as their own property, shipping artifacts to European and American museums with minimal consultation. Hawass stated his mission was to snatch Egyptology out of the hands of Westerners. The SCA required all discoveries to be reported through official Egyptian channels before publication. Whatever one thinks of Hawass's personality, the underlying principle, that Egypt has the right to control access to its own heritage, is broadly accepted in modern archaeological ethics. The cost of this control has been a self-reinforcing cycle. Denied access generates suspicion among researchers and the public. Suspicion generates sensational claims. Sensational claims alienate the authorities. Tightened access feeds more suspicion. The Sphinx became trapped in a feedback loop between legitimate institutional authority and the conspiratorial imagination that authority inevitably provokes. The broader question of why Egypt restricts access requires more nuance than either side typically acknowledges. The Sphinx is not merely an archaeological site, it is the single most recognizable symbol of Egyptian civilization, a centerpiece of national identity, and a critical component of an economy that depends increasingly on tourism revenue. Any research activity that could damage the Sphinx, delay tourism access, or generate international controversy represents a tangible risk to institutional interests that extend far beyond archaeology. Graham Hancock and Robert Bouval provided the most influential alternative narrative. Their 1996 book, published as Keeper of Genesis in the United Kingdom and The Message of the Sphinx in the United States, argued that the Sphinx dates to 10,500 BC, the beginning of the astrological age of Leo, and that the 3 Giza pyramids mirror the belt stars of the constellation Orion as they appeared at that date. They alleged a conspiracy between the Egyptology establishment and various confidential organizations to keep the secrets of the pyramids from the world. Mainstream astronomers rejected the Orion correlation theory as imprecise and cherry-picked, noting that the pyramid alignment only approximates the belt stars and only from a specific viewing angle. But the narrative proved culturally powerful. It offered a grand, romantic alternative to the mainstream account and tapped a deep public appetite for hidden knowledge. In a development that complicates the conspiracy narrative, Hancock and West themselves issued a joint statement in 1998, defending Hawass against conspiracy theorist Larry Hunter. They wrote explicitly, "There are no conspiracies. There are no hidden finds. There is no skullduggery." The relationship subsequently deteriorated. At a planned 2015 debate at the Mina House Hotel, Hawass saw a slide of Bouval in Hancock's presentation, erupted in fury and walked out. When Hawass appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast in May 2025, his dismissive attitude toward alternative theories and his repeated insistence that his book contained all necessary information generated massive online criticism. Rogan described the episode as the toughest podcast he had ever made it through. Hawass called it the worst interview he had ever done in his life. The exchange encapsulated decades of mutual frustration between institutional Egyptology and the alternative research community that has built a vast popular audience around the mysteries of Giza. The political dynamics shifted further during and after the 2011 revolution. Hawass was dismissed from his position amid protests. Young Egyptian archaeologists who had long resented his perceived monopoly on access and credit were among the most vocal critics. 7 successors cycled through the position in the chaotic month that followed. Tourism collapsed by roughly 50%. The institutional apparatus that had maintained stable, if restrictive, research policies fractured. The post-revolution period saw a gradual restoration of institutional control, but policy shifted further toward tourism development and away from controversial research. The Grand Egyptian Museum, opened in November 2025 at a cost of approximately $1.2 billion, became the centerpiece of Egypt's cultural strategy, with Egypt targeting 30 million annual visitors by the early 2030s. The Sphinx, in this context, is an asset to be protected and presented, not a research subject to be probed and potentially rendered controversial. This institutional calculus explains the pattern of access decisions more coherently than either conservation rationale or conspiracy theories. Egypt permits research that enhances the prestige of Egyptian archaeology. the Scan Pyramids collaboration with Cairo University, the ERA excavations directed by Lena with Egyptian collaborators. Egypt restricts research that might feed alternative narratives, attract sensational media coverage, or challenge the authority of Egyptian institutions. The distinction is not between good science and bad science. It is between science that serves Egyptian institutional interests and science that does not. Mark Lehner continues directing AERA's excavations of the lost city of the pyramid builders, where his work has demonstrated that the pyramids were built by a well-organised, well-fed Egyptian workforce rather than slaves, foreign labourers, or bearers of lost Atlantean knowledge. Egypt's current Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, Sheriff Fathi, appointed in July 2024, has made no public statements about Sphinx exploration. The policy of restrictive access has survived the man who most visibly implemented it. It has become institutional rather than personal, which may make it more durable. If the politics explain why the question remains unanswered, what does the broader archaeological and historical record tell us about whether the question is even worth asking? Ancient traditions, modern parallels, and the Osiris shaft. The Osiris shaft. Beneath the causeway connecting Khafra's Valley Temple to his pyramid lies the most dramatic confirmed subterranean structure on the Giza Plateau. The Osiris shaft descends roughly 30 metres through 3 distinct levels, and its existence was described, or at least alluded to, over 2,000 years before any modern archaeologist entered it. Herodotus, writing around 450 BC, described a subterranean tomb where a pharaoh lay buried on an island surrounded by water channeled from the Nile. The discovery of the shaft's lowest chamber, containing a sarcophagus surrounded by water-filled channels, suggests he may have been relaying something real, however distorted through layers of translation. Selim Hassan partially explored the shaft during his 1933-34 excavations, vividly describing its upper levels but unable to reach the perpetually flooded lowest chamber. For decades, the water-filled shaft served as a swimming hole for local children. Hawass completed the first full excavation in 1999, requiring constant pumping to manage the groundwater. Level 1, roughly 10 metres down, was empty. Level 2, approximately 23 metres down, contained a central chamber with 6 side rooms carved from the living rock. Within these rooms, the team found granite and basalt sarcophagi, 2 containing poorly preserved human remains, along with Ushabti figurines, pottery sherds and beads dating to the 26th dynasty. Level 3, between 25 and 30 metres deep, proved most significant. A large hall with 4 stone pillars, surrounded by a wall containing a perfectly preserved but empty granite sarcophagus. Beneath its lid, Hawass found the hieroglyphic sign PR, meaning house. This connects to the plateau's ancient name Parwuser Enbi Astor. Quote 2, Rostow translates as quote 3. The Egyptians named the plateau itself for the passages beneath it. Red polished pottery with traces of white paint from level 3 dates stylistically to the 6th dynasty, approximately 2355 to 2195 BC, the oldest datable material in the entire complex, pushing the shaft's earliest use back to the late Old Kingdom, centuries before the late period burials in level 2. Small shafts, roughly 40 by 40 centimetres, were found cut in the direction of the pyramid and the Sphinx, though none continues to a larger chamber. In the late period, the Egyptians cut a tunnel about 6 metres long on the west wall. A boy was sent through during the excavation. It terminates in a dead end. Hawass interpreted the complex as a symbolic tomb of Osiris, analogous to the Osirian at Abydos, a ritual recreation of the primordial island rising from the waters of Nun, deep in the living rock. The architectural parallels between the 2 sites, particularly the central sarcophagus surrounded by water, support this interpretation. The Osiris shaft was opened to the public for the first time in 2017. Its existence demonstrates beyond question that the ancient Egyptians carved deep subterranean structures at Giza, reaching 30 metres with architectural sophistication and ritual purpose. This does not prove that similar structures exist beneath the Sphinx, but it establishes that the geological and engineering capacity was available, and that the cultural motivation to do so was present. Given the Sphinx's central role in the funerary landscape of the plateau, the possibility of comparable subterranean features cannot be dismissed on grounds of implausibility alone. The causeway connecting Khafra's valley temple to his pyramid passes directly over the Osiris shaft, raising its own questions. Was the shaft cut before the causeway, requiring construction over it, or afterward, through the causeway floor? The stratigraphic evidence suggests the shaft was in use by at least the 6th dynasty, several centuries after Khafra's 4th dynasty construction. The relationship between surface architecture and subsurface features on the Giza Plateau appears more complex than the simple model of builders constructing on virgin rock. The workers' city excavated by Lena's era team southeast of the pyramids, barracks housing up to 2,000 workers, bakeries producing thousands of loaves daily, copper tool workshops, demonstrates organizational capacity entirely consistent with the creation of deep subterranean structures. The diet of the workers, as revealed by faunal remains, included primarily male cattle under 2 years old, prime beef, suggesting valued participants in a national project, not slaves. The Sphinx Temple, situated directly in front of the monument, was built using limestone blocks quarried from the U-shaped ditch carved around the Sphinx during its creation. Geologist Thomas Aigner demonstrated in 1980 that the geological layers in the temple's 173 core blocks match precisely the strata from which they were quarried. The temple was never completed. Its massive core blocks were intended to be faced with granite, but the facing was never applied. No titles of priests or priestesses associated with the Sphinx Temple cult have ever been found. Lena has proposed that the Sphinx ditch and the temple were the last items under construction when Khafra died, left unfinished when his successor redirected resources. The Valley Temple of Khafra, immediately adjacent, was completed and fitted with its granite casing. The contrast between finished and unfinished is significant. If the surface temple was abandoned mid-project, the possibility that subterranean elements of the same program were similarly begun and left incomplete remains open. This quarry construction model also matters for the subsurface question more broadly. If the Sphinx was carved from a natural rocky knoll by quarrying away surrounding limestone, the operation would have exposed pre-existing geological features: fracture planes, dissolution cavities, soft marly beds. The builders would have encountered these features and had to decide how to incorporate or avoid them. Some cavities may have been enlarged for practical or ritual purposes. Others may have been sealed. The boundary between natural geology and human modification would be inherently ambiguous. Precisely the ambiguity that modern geophysical surveys detect but cannot resolve. Ancient traditions of hidden knowledge, the dream. Stela of Thutmose IV, erected between the Sphinx's paws around 1400 BC, provides the earliest documented evidence of Egyptian engagement with the Sphinx's mysteries. The stela describes how the young prince, while hunting on the plateau, fell asleep in the Sphinx's shadow and dreamed that the monument, identified as the god Hormaket, Horus in the horizon, promised him the throne if he would clear the suffocating sand. Thutmose fulfilled the bargain and became pharaoh. The stela is a political document, a legitimation text for a pharaoh who may not have been the expected heir. That the Sphinx served as the vehicle for this legitimation reveals its new kingdom status, not merely an old statue but an active divine presence, capable of conferring kingship. Selim Hassan's excavations uncovered numerous votive stelae from pilgrims, several depicting the Sphinx elevated on a pedestal with a door at its base. Whether this door was symbolic or depicted an actual physical entrance cannot be determined. The recurrence of the motif across independent offerings suggests that the idea of an opening at the Sphinx's base was at least a recognized element of its iconography. The stela's text explicitly places the Sphinx beside Sokar in Rasetjor, identifying the area with the underworld god associated with subterranean passages. The name Rasetjor, or Rostau, is the same term from the plateau's full designation. A 2021 University of Montana thesis proposed that the Osiris shaft be understood as the Shetayet of Sokar, the hidden place of Sokar described in funerary literature. The 4th and 5th hours of the Amduat depict the sealed realm of Sokar as a subterranean domain guarded by serpents and surrounded by sand. These representations may be entirely symbolic, mapping theological geography onto physical landscape, or they may preserve knowledge of actual subterranean features accessible in antiquity and subsequently lost. Medieval Islamic writers continued the tradition. Arab historians describe the Sphinx as a talisman guarding hidden treasure. Al-Makrizi, writing in the 15th century, repeated legends of underground passages from the Sphinx to the pyramids, said to contain the accumulated wisdom of the ancients, preserved against a catastrophic flood. These legends bear structural similarities to Casey's narrative, though no direct line of transmission has been established. The resemblance could reflect a common human tendency to project expectations of hidden knowledge onto enigmatic ancient monuments, or it could preserve fragments of actual ancient tradition about subterranean features known in antiquity and subsequently forgotten. Without additional documentary evidence, neither explanation can be confirmed. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder in the 1st century AD reported that local inhabitants of the Giza area in his time believed the Sphinx was hollow and contained the tomb of a king named Hermes. Whether this belief reflected actual knowledge of internal passages, since at least several are now documented, or simply the imaginative speculation that large stone monuments have always inspired, cannot be determined from the surviving text alone. It could imply that some awareness of the Sphinx's internal features persisted in local tradition long after their original creation. The expectation of hidden spaces is not a modern invention. It is an ancient tradition embedded in the monument's cultural identity as deeply as the geological strata are embedded in the bedrock. The modern version, shaped by Casey's specific Atlantean prophecies, is merely the latest iteration of a recurring narrative. This does not validate the modern claims, but it establishes that the desire to find hidden chambers is a human response to a monument that has provoked exactly this kind of wonder for as long as it has existed as a cultural object. The scan pyramids parallel. The contrast between what has been permitted at the pyramids and what has been denied at the Sphinx is instructive. In 2015, a Cairo University Hip Institute collaboration launched a systematic survey of Giza's pyramids using infrared thermography and muon tomography. The muon detectors, placed inside the Great Pyramid's known chambers, measured cosmic ray flux. Voids produce higher counts because fewer muons are absorbed passing through empty space. By analysing the muon flux from multiple detector positions, the team reconstructed three-dimensional density maps of the pyramid's interior. The results were dramatic. In 2016, the team announced a previously unknown void behind the chevron zone on the north face. In 2017, they published in Nature the discovery of the Big Void, a cavity at least 30 metres long above the Grand Gallery, the largest internal structure found since the 19th century. In 2023, they published characterization of the North Face corridor in Nature Communications. In 2025, electrical resistivity tomography independently confirmed the corridor in scientific reports. The methodological progression is worth noting. Initial muon detection identified a void. Subsequent measurements from different angles refined its size and position. Ground-penetrating radar and ultrasonic testing independently confirmed it. And finally, guided by the combined data, the team found an opening in a joint behind the chevron blocks and inserted a 5mm endoscope, obtaining the first direct visual confirmation. A corridor with a high vaulted ceiling unseen for 4,500 years. This is what systematic, well-supported, multi-year investigation looks like, when institutional will aligns with technological capability. These discoveries were achieved with full Egyptian institutional cooperation. Cairo University provided researchers and logistical support. The Supreme Council of Antiquities granted permits. Hawass characteristically was initially dismissive, telling the New York Times in 2017 that the Scan Pyramids team found nothing. When the endoscope images were released, he reversed course, calling it the most important discovery of the 21st century. The reversal illustrated a pattern: initial resistance followed by enthusiastic ownership, once results proved safely interpretable within the framework of Egyptian achievement. The contrast with the Sphinx is stark and instructive. The same government that permitted the systematic, multi-year, multi-technology scanning of the Great Pyramid has not authorized a single modern geophysical survey of the Sphinx's subsurface since 1999. The difference cannot be attributed to conservation concerns. Muon detectors required equipment installation in enclosed spaces, while non-invasive Sphinx scanning would require no physical contact at all. The reasons are partly technical. Muon tomography requires placing detectors inside or beneath the structure being scanned, with sufficient vertical mass above to produce measurable muon shadows. The Sphinx At only 20 meters tall and carved from bedrock rather than built from blocks, presents unique challenges. It lacks the internal spaces needed for detector placement. Its mass may be insufficient to produce clear muon contrasts at the depths of interest. These are genuine technical limitations, though not necessarily insurmountable ones. But other technologies have no such limitations. Modern ground-penetrating radar arrays, electrical resistivity tomography, and ambient noise seismic interferometry could be deployed at the Sphinx with no physical contact and no risk to the monument. The SIDEP project is currently building scintillator-based muon telescopes to scan Khafra's pyramid, technology that could potentially be adapted for the Sphinx's geometry. The tools to answer the question exist today. They have been demonstrated at other sites on the same plateau. Their absence from the Sphinx is a matter of policy, not capability. The deeper difference is narrative. The Great Pyramid's internal voids are interpreted within the framework of Egyptian architectural achievement, additional chambers, corridors, and structural features consistent with the monument's function as a royal tomb. The Sphinx's subsurface carries the inescapable association with the Hall of Records, Atlantis, and the challenge to conventional chronology. The same discovery that enhances Egyptian pride when found inside a pyramid threatens it when sought beneath the Sphinx. Hidden chambers within a pyramid are celebrated as additional Egyptian achievements. The Sphinx's subsurface, contaminated by decades of association with an American clairvoyant's prophecies, cannot yield a discovery that will be received as purely Egyptian. Whatever is found will be claimed by others, reinterpreted through foreign frameworks, and used to challenge Egyptian authorship and ownership. The institutional reluctance is not about what might be found. It is about who will control the story of what is found. And so we arrive at the deepest question, not what lies beneath the Sphinx, but whether knowing would change anything at all. The cost of knowing. There is a consideration that rarely appears in popular accounts, but that shapes the thinking of every professional archaeologist at Giza. It is the consideration of what a definitive answer would actually accomplish, and what it might cost. Suppose a comprehensive modern survey were authorized, employing every available non-invasive technology, ground-penetrating radar arrays with modern signal processing, electrical resistivity tomography with three-dimensional inversion algorithms, ambient noise seismic interferometry, and perhaps even custom-designed muon detectors configured for the Sphinx's specific geometry. Suppose the survey conclusively demonstrated that the 12 by 9 meter anomaly beneath the left paw is a natural dissolution cavity, that the Waseda geometric void between the forefeet is a joint-controlled cast feature, and that no man-made chambers exist anywhere beneath the monument. The Hall of Records does not exist. There is nothing to find. Would this settle the debate? History suggests it would not. The SRI team's 1978 drilling found natural features at every borehole, and the response from Casey supporters was not acceptance but redirection. The wrong anomalies were tested. The drilling was incomplete. The cameras missed something. A comprehensive negative result would generate the same response at greater scale. The instruments malfunctioned. The analysis was biased. The Egyptian authorities buried the real data. The conspiracy narrative is self-reinforcing precisely because it accommodates all evidence, positive or negative, as confirmation that powerful institutions are hiding the truth. Conversely, suppose the survey demonstrated conclusively that man-made chambers do exist beneath the Sphinx. Suppose the 12 by 9 meter void proved to be an excavated space, its walls smooth and parallel, its dimensions deliberate. The discovery would be extraordinary. It would also be immediately claimed by every alternative researcher as validation of their specific narrative, regardless of what the chambers actually contained. An empty space would be described as a chamber from which records had already been removed. A natural cave modified by ancient quarrying would be described as a deliberately designed repository. A water-filled void containing sediment and debris would be described as a flooded archive awaiting recovery. The discovery itself, whatever it revealed, would be secondary to the narrative imposed upon it. This dilemma, in which both positive and negative results are likely to be co-opted by narratives that precede and preempt the evidence, creates a genuine strategic problem for Egyptian authorities. The rational response, from a purely institutional perspective, may indeed be to avoid triggering the debate altogether. The cost of continued uncertainty is manageable. a chronic background hum of conspiracy theories that most serious people ignore. The cost of definitive investigation, whether the result is positive or negative, might be an explosion of uncontrollable public speculation, media sensationalism, and political controversy that would dwarf anything the Sphinx has generated to date. This analysis does not justify the restrictions. Scientific inquiry has intrinsic value, regardless of how its results might be misused. The bedrock contains information about geological history, ancient engineering, and the relationship between surface monuments and subterranean features on the plateau. That information belongs to the scientific record. Its absence is a genuine loss. But the analysis explains the inaction in more sympathetic terms than conspiracy narratives allow. The Egyptian authorities are not cartoon villains sitting on top of ancient secrets. They are institutional actors managing a monument of extraordinary cultural, economic and political significance in a media environment that rewards sensationalism over nuance. Their caution has costs, measured in unanswered questions and unresolved scientific debates. It also has benefits, measured in a monument that continues to stand, continues to attract visitors, and continues to represent Egyptian civilization to the world without the chaos that definitive investigation of any outcome would almost certainly unleash. Whether the political will to deploy modern technology beneath the world's most famous statue will materialize remains, for now, the deepest mystery of the Sphinx. The question persists. The instruments wait. The bedrock holds whatever it holds: natural voids or carved chambers, geological accident or deliberate construction, emptiness or archive. 45 centuries of human engagement with the Sphinx have produced reverence, restoration, decay, prophecy, science, spectacle, and argument. They have not produced an answer to the most basic question: what is down there? And so the Sphinx continues to do what it has always done. It sits in silence on the eastern edge of the plateau, facing the rising sun, guarding its secrets with the patient indifference of stone.